I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
This is our 26th episode, John Gartner. Can you believe it? We've been at this a long time in this weekly show, and we began at a time when most people were not aware of Trump's severe personality disorder, something we call malignant narcissism, which accounted for his immoral behavior, criminal activity, compulsive lying, sadistic treatment of women and others. But John and I began the show really because there was another layer of pathology that we were seeing, which were early signs of dementia. And those signs, which we'll be talking about later in the program with a very important letter that was published this week, includes what John likes to refer to as phonemic paraphasias, where Trump begins a word but can't complete it, a kind of weird dumbing down of his language and his thinking, so he's become much more simple and simplistic, a digressive language where he kind of loses his way and then claims it's genius and part of the weave or the Steve, as a very funny friend of mine likes to say, and other signs. And I guess most importantly, there's been a sudden decrease in self-regulation and impulsivity. So he's now talking about Donald Palmer's penis, and he's referring to Kamala Harris with swear words. And there's a way in which it feels very impulsive, as if he's lost the ability to slow himself down and think about what he's going to say. John, what do you think?
Well, we've really been, in a way, kind of information warriors. We've been struggling for years to get this message out to the public because it's necessary in order for us to save the republic. We're going to talk later with George Conway about the effort of the Anti-Psychopath PAC. We've published a letter in the New York Times today, signed by 230 mental health professionals, and we put out a video that's going to be shown on cable news in swing states and beamed to Mar-a-Lago to try to get this message out with one last case before the American voters. But the reason I think the message has really penetrated, and I think it is beginning to penetrate, number one, he's getting worse, as we predicted, right? So even in the 6 months that we've been doing this show, which in some ways feels like a long time, but in other ways really isn't a long time when you're talking about someone's deterioration. For someone to have deteriorated so rapidly in 6 months is really a sign that he does have dementia or some kind of organically based cognitive decline that is accelerating.
Yes.
So one thing that's made our case for us is he keeps making our case for us. But the other thing, right? But the other thing that's made our case for us is the Kamala Harris campaign has taken up this message and they are running with it and they are amplifying it, and therefore also forcing the press then to react to it. So we're going to show you 3 videos that the Harris campaign put out in the last week, all about Trump's cognitive decline. They're delightful. Let's watch them.
Trump advisor told producers that Trump was exhausted and refusing interviews.
He would be the oldest president ever inaugurated if he wins in November.
He will not agree to a second presidential debate.
The former president was swaying and asked to play songs for about 40 minutes.
Donald Trump's public appearances have deteriorated.
The stomach is speaking. Many Azerasians, just like putting a million Rambos, good old Sylvester Stallone is my friend.
There is no way that this man who can't make it through an entire speech, who keeps canceling things, is going to be the person that does 4 more years.
I don't think we could do a better job ourselves. I know that sounds like a conceited compliment, but in other words, we're the experts and we've been trying to get this message out. They're articulating it beautifully, and really they're taking all these cuts that we've been looking at and putting them together to make the case.
Yes. No, it's concise and it's powerful. As a Democrat, and here's where I step aside from my position as a psychologist, but think of myself as a Democrat. it's been so long since we've seen a Democratic campaign this good. I think it's really been since Obama.
Sure.
And before that, there was a desert. Desert. And
Well,
this is just, they're just really hitting it out of the park.
And they're hitting him where it hurts, right?
Mhm.
And they keep hitting him. We're going to look at another commercial. What I like about this one is it's actually quite medically sophisticated, because one of the things that we've said about in terms of it's necessary to diagnose someone as having dementia to see a decline in their functioning, right? That decline in functioning from someone's own baseline is the essential component of any kind of deteriorating illness.
Yes.
And so they've gotten this message. Look at this video where they compare him before to now.
November 8th. Get out and vote.
If everybody gets out and votes on January 5th or before,
If Japan is attacked, we have to be in World War III, okay?
we would be in World War II.
for the people of Arizona.
Also, we have many Azerasians in our room.
We will stop illegal immigration, deport every last criminal alien, and dismantle every criminal gang and cartel threatening our citizens. And that'll happen very quickly.
You know why? They moved all their criminals from Venezuela right into the good old USA.
But, sir, where are those numbers coming from?
I guess I get them from the papers in this case.
If I'm elected, you won't lose one plant. You'll have plants coming into this country. You're going to have jobs again. If I'm in a boat, it's all electric, and it starts to sink. I asked the guy, do you get electrocuted sitting over this? And then I say, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, do you? Because it's an analogy. I say, and if there's a shark about 10 yards away, right where they are, right where all the congressmen are, right over there, look at us.
For those of you who are just listening, the headline is Donald Trump is declining, right? So they're using that term, declining, and obviously they're talking about cognitive decline. And it may have not been clear to you if you were listening, but they had two sections, 2016 and 2024. And so some of the more wacky statements that you heard were the 2024 ones that they were contrasting to the 2016 ones. And in other words, he was always a doofus and a prejudiced idiot, right? But now they're showing that his verbalizations are even more primitive, even more confused, right? Even more gummed together and bizarre.
Yes. Very effective.
Very effective, right? They're really doing a good job over there. All right. And the other thing that we're noticing and that they've been hitting him on, remember when he hit Jeb Bush, called him low energy Jeb, right? And it really stuck. It really worked. Well, one of the things we've been noticing about Trump is that he seems to be kind of low, periodically very low energy. He seems to be going through kind of a semi-depressive phase, it seems, at some points. And so the Harris campaign is picking up on it. Let's see that video.
I don't sleep that much.
Donald Trump has recently, we've seen he has canceled some interviews. A Trump advisor told the Shade Room producers that Trump was, quote, exhausted and refusing some interviews.
Can I ask you what really...
Hey, Dan, I got to get going.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They're going crazy.
All right.
Reports that he's falling asleep.
I see my people are going crazy over there.
Oh, that's it?
Time to go, right? Okay.
And again, for those who were just listening, they're interspersing. He fell asleep at a rally. And so they're showing interspersing signs of him leaving these interviews early, right? Because someone's calling him, but they're really not. He's just, but while you heard the lullaby music and the snoring in the background.
It's like he was in court.
Yeah, it's like he was in court, which, by the way, again, you know how we just sort of these things come and then they go and we forget about them. I keep remind people falling asleep in court is extraordinarily rare. And falling asleep in court most days is simply unprecedented and unheard of and speaks to this organic problem. The people who have dementia do sometimes just fall asleep in the middle of the day randomly, no matter what.
It also, just occurring to me, one thing that you do when someone is suffering from dementia is when you visit them, you keep them engaged. Because if you don't keep someone with dementia engaged, they'll drift off. And in court, he had to sit there.
That's a good point.
No one was talking to him. It wasn't about like he was testifying. He had to sit there for 6-7 hours at a time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Well, you talked about visiting people in the nursing home. This last ad is by Eric Swalwell, and I have to admit, it's really my favorite. I call it A Place for Don.
We were so worried.
They're eating the dogs.
He wasn't making any sense.
The people come in. They're eating the cats.
And he just kept getting worse.
They did dumps. That's what they call them, dumps. Big, massive dumps.
Gross.
In Michigan and Pennsylvania. All over.
We had to do something.
They will take the life of the child in the 9th month. Even after birth, they'll execute the baby.
You sound crazy right now. Then a friend told us there was somewhere he could get the help he so desperately needed, called A Place for Trump.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
Now he has round-the-clock support and can enjoy the things he loves, like eating cheeseburgers and rage posting at 3 a.m.
I know windmills very much, and they're driving the whales, I think, a little batty.
Sure. So this November, let's vote to put him in A Place for Trump, because we all know he belongs in a home, just not this one.
I have concepts of a plan.
Of course you do.
I'm
Eric
sorry.
Swalwell, man, that's so great.
That's just chef's kiss. If I was Paul Hollywood, I'd give him a handshake right now. That is just amazing. I just love, and really, I think it kind of really does get to the essence of what's really happening. It's satire, right? But all of these behaviors, if you saw them in an elderly relative, you would be responding with that kind of concern, right?
Yes.
And so it doesn't seem as much like a satire as it is, because it actually is sort of a plausible scenario, which if people were making these kinds of crazy, non sequitur statements, this is how their family would actually react. And it shows how gaslit we are as a nation, that we're not seeing it through that lens.
Well, I think I agree with you, but there's also a way in which when Trump says these really crazy things, he's saying it with bravado and confidence and charm. And that's what his followers hear. Mm-hmm. So they don't notice how crazy it is.
Well, and that's really a phenomenon we're going to have to be exploring, right? How is it possible for people to not see the craziness? And actually, next week, we're going to have a guest, Stephen Duckett, who is a political psychologist, who's going to look at tell us more about the psychology of Trump supporters. Well, so you alluded to one of the really crazy things that Donald Trump did last week, which is, here we are, right? We're in the home stretch. This is your final argument before the voters. And what is Trump talking about? Let's see the AP headline. Trump kicks off a Pennsylvania rally by talking about Arnold Palmer's genitalia. I never thought that would be an AP headline that I would read. Let's see that videotape.
Old man. This man was strong and tough. And I refuse to say it, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God. That's unbelievable. I had to say it. We have women that are highly sophisticated here, but they used to look at Arnold and say, bad, but he was real.
I mean, the disinhibition, right? To not have any kind of filter, to say some things that are just completely inappropriate, tangential, socially inappropriate, not at all to the point. And this is his final argument before the voters.
Well, and he did it for 12 minutes. I mean, it's a really extended talking about being friends with him. But I don't know if you noticed the people behind him. There's a way in which he's joking and saying, you know what, I'm going to cross this boundary and you guys are with me. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter that he then called, Kamala Harris a shit vice president. But it's like you and me, folks. We know what we're doing. We can break the rules together, can't we?
Mm-hmm. Like a kind of conspiratorial bad boy.
Let's
And you're right. People were laughing. People were laughing.
So confident. It's not like people were going, "Oh my God, did you hear him?"
No, that's right.
And he's getting off on it. He's riffing with them. Now, it's not expanding his base by any means. But
this is a theme that we're, I think, going to be talking about today. In terms of Earth 1 and Earth 2, right? The same rally can look different and literally opposite. I mean, black and white to Earth 1 and Earth 2. So as members of Earth 1, we're going, what the fuck? Like where the hell did that, like, that's crazy. But the people on Earth 2, they're all laughing with him. He's being naughty. He's saying he shouldn't say. It's risque. And so really totally opposite reactions. And I think that's really something that is gonna kind of be a theme today. Well, there is something a little suspicious in terms of what does he really mean? What is he really feeling? What is he really getting at with all of this talk about, Arnold's genitalia? There's another point where he seems to be referring to it indirectly.
But it'd break the hell out of it because he was so powerful. And they went back to the members' bags because they couldn't afford another set. And it used very stiff-shafted clubs, very strong for those of you that aren't golfers. That's for like good golfers with power. Very stiff-shafted.
They're very stiff-shafted clubs. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting choice of words.
Yeah, it's all there, isn't it?
I mean, it's like he's got some homosexual preoccupation with Arnold Palmer, which is fine. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's coming out in a way that's not appropriate. This would not be a place for him to come out.
Well, I'm going to leave that aside for a moment, John. I'm not sure that he's about to come out, but what I think we are seeing is a preoccupation with power.
Yeah.
And if Trump is declining, then I think what he's doing here is he's asserting through an identification with Palmer that he's the biggest and the most powerful. And then it kind of devolves to this kind of phallic thing where, Palmer had this enormous penis and used these big clubs. And I think Trump is implying that he uses clubs like that too. So I see it more as his borrowing masculine power from Palmer.
I think you're right.
Because he feels his cognitive slip.
Yeah. Right.
That doesn't override the fact that he's really connecting with his audience.
But I think you're right about that. It really is about identifying with his phallic power. And the thing that supports you is look at the next thing he says, that he's better than Arnold Palmer.
Arnold was a very rich man. And I said to Arnold, I got to know him when he was 69 years old. And I played pretty much with him, a lot of them. And as he got older, when you get older, you start to lose a thing called distance. And I'm a good golfer. Not like that, but I'm a good golfer. And I felt so good because I was hitting it a little bit longer than Arnold. But he was by this time about 75, 76. And I'd hit it 4 or 5 yards past him. I said,
just a little bit longer than Arnold.
Right. I'm not as popular as George Washington. Well, maybe I am more popular than George Washington. It's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the same thing. But but and again, talking about how on top of it the Harris campaign is, they came out and went there, commenting on his Palmer comment. This is an official press release from the Harris Walz campaign on their stationery. Trump's Pennsylvania closing argument is literal junk. In a Pennsylvania rally speech, his campaign team billed as the beginning of the closing argument in the final stretch. Donald Trump focused on the issue most important to voters in this election, a deceased golfer's anatomy. Again, from the Earth One perspective, that's nuts.
Right. And they're hardly going to acknowledge the way that he was connecting with the crowd. I mean, they're running against him.
Right. That's true. And now he's kind of given Arnold Palmer a whole other connotation. For example, there's a drink called Arnold Palmer. I don't know if you knew that, but now that drink is starting to take on a different meaning.
Can I get an Arnold Palmer, please? Okay, you got it. Can I get an Arnold Palmer, please?
Oh. You want an Arnold Palmer?
You got it.
And there were some people on Twitter that were saying that his dance move that we're calling the double jerk, or that Bill Maher calls the double jerk off, as if he's jerking off two men. Somebody was saying that actually he's dreaming about Arnold Palmer when he does that. So we may need to rename that dance the Arnold Palmer. So maybe we'll start a dance craze. Do the Arnold Palmer. All right. Well, and Harry, speaking about the different ways in which Earth 1 and Earth 2 see these things, an even better example is his appearance at McDonald's. Right? This is something that the left has, excoriated him for, laughed at him for, and yet, in terms of connecting with his base, it actually may have worked. So he worked a 15-minute shift at McDonald's for a photo op. And this is what it looked like.
Hello, everybody.
Sir?
My first day at McDonald's. I'm looking for a job.
Slowly, gently lowered into the oil. Don't want to burn yourself. Up, down a little bit further. Gotcha. There you go.
I promise. Thank you very much. That's on me. Okay? Have a good time. Thank you very much. Keep it tight. We got the salt on it. Never touches the human hand.
Very good.
Nice and full.
Thank you.
Never even touch it, huh?
What he couldn't stand was when he heard that Kamala Harris had worked at McDonald's as a young person. And he went on this whole rant, right, about how she lied. She's a liar. She never worked at McDonald's, which is sort of a crazy thing, again, to run on. First of all, he had no evidence that she was lying. Why would someone lie about something so trivial? But he understood that his base identifies with McDonald's, and he's a McDonald's guy, and he didn't want her to have McDonald's. So he just decided, because he has a way of just making his reality true. No, he's going to be the guy who works at McDonald's. The billionaire who's never, worked a minimum wage job in his life is somehow, to me, it's like Dukakis popping out of the tank, right? It was so incongruous because, come on, this very kind of beta male-ish guy is trying to look macho by popping out of a tank. It looked ridiculous. Well, here's some fat billionaire, trying to look like a man of the people by, salting French fries for 15 minutes. It seems ridiculous. And yet you saw that crowd welcoming him, and he seems to have gotten a lot of coverage.
Well, it's funny because when John and I were discussing the show, and, there's a lot of criticism of Trump on the left about how staged this was, and a lot of jokes about it. And I saw it and I thought, this is brilliant. He's charming. He's warm. He comes in saying, I'm looking for a job. He's serving people, saying, don't worry, it's on me. It was an extraordinarily brilliant thing to do. And it made my heart sink because, while he's doing that, he's talking about wanting to jail his political opponents by name. And we're hearing that he wishes his generals were like Hitler's generals. This is a dangerous fascist, and yet look at that incredible photo op that he did. I just think it was amazing, but it scares me.
Yeah. So in terms of the criticisms, here's New York Magazine pointing out, so in an effort to highlight his claim that Kamala Harris never worked at McDonald's, Trump pretended to work at a closed McDonald's where he served pretend orders to supporters pretending to be customers. So again, this was one of the things that people were making fun of him about. Oh, it was so fake. Not only is it fake that he's pretending to work a shift, this billionaire, but the restaurant wasn't even open. They weren't even real customers. But as you're saying, to his base, it doesn't really matter.
No.
And actually, here's the real fakeness of it. He's there identifying with minimum wage workers, but here someone manages actually to ask him,
great.
Is he willing to raise the minimum wage?
Minimum wage should be raised.
Well, I think these people who work hard, they're great. And I just saw a process that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to see. These are great franchises and produce a lot of jobs, and it's great. And great people working here, too.
But minimum wage is recently increased.
So, yes, ma'am.
So he never answers the question about the minimum wage.
Yeah, but he does that expertly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He goes on about how great the people are and the franchises are great. He's having a great time. And he just doesn't answer the question, not even the second time. And that's not dementia. That's retail politics, man. He is in his element.
And it's just so tragic because here's the point. He's trying to reach the McDonald's crowd and identify with them and get them to identify with him when he's blatantly screwing them.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's been true for so long.
Exactly.
But the fact is listen, I know a lot of working class people, and I'm one of these weird people with a lot of educational degrees, and I don't think education and intelligence are the same thing necessarily at all. I have working class friends who I think are really smart and I go to for advice, but everyone in the working class started at a fast food place.
Mm-hmm,
Every one of them.
Right.
And Trump knows it.
Right. Well, Harry, not everything went smoothly at the drive-in that day. We have a video of someone who was trying to place an order.
Hello, welcome to McDonald's. How can I help you?
Yeah, can I get a 20-piece chicken nuggets?
Well, I can give you some French fries. They're the best fries. Nobody makes fries like these. You're gonna love them.
I don't really want fries. Can I get
I made these fries, and everybody says, oh, these are the best fries we've ever had.
Okay.
These are the best fries. No one makes fries like you.
I really just want a chicken sandwich. Can I?
Kamala never makes fries like this. She doesn't know how. Only I know how. You're gonna have to try these fries. You'll love them.
Look, can I maybe speak to the manager or somebody? Is there someone else I can talk to?
You want to speak to the manager? How about this? How about we just listen to some music? You want to listen to some music? Okay, here we go.
Okay, yeah.
There's no need to feel down. I said, young man, pick yourself off the ground. I said, young man.
Okay, well, that obviously was satire. It didn't happen, just in case anyone was confused. But it was labeled the worst McDonald's experience ever.
Now, listen, it's funny, and it will make people in blue states and people voting against him. It's funny, but I think I don't want it to distract the fact that this is Trump at his most dangerous, actually, as far as winning.
Well, and lastly, let's hear what Walz has to say about it. And remember, Walz is someone who does connect with working class voters, right? And so he's trying to address, as sort of an everyman, how ridiculous that performance was.
Over the weekend, he made a little appearance over the weekend. You might have seen this. He went to a McDonald's and dressed up as the drive-through worker. They found him an apron his size and put it on him. And I was thinking, it is possible he mixed up his weekends and thought that it was Halloween already. He's been forgetting things lately, as you might have noticed. Being at McDonald's, he looks much more like Ronald McDonald than the clown that he actually is. Tell me you don't see this one coming from a mile away. And Ronald wears less makeup. You saw it coming. You saw it coming.
He is such a great comedian.
See what he did there?
Yeah, exactly.
But you see, he has more authority. You really couldn't have Kamala say that. You needed someone in there who has the credibility to make fun of Trump doing it. That was very effective, I think.
I think it was too. I think was too. And as you were pointing, and one last thing I want to show, in terms of your point about it being effective, I want to show a propaganda photo from World War II. It's a picture of Mussolini, who also decided to have a photo op to show himself working in the fields as a worker, right? Which, of course, was also a staged photo op, but it communicates the same idea that you're talking about, Harry, getting him to connect with the people. And to some extent, it worked. Just see that historic photo.
Oh, yeah. Look at that.
Look at that, right? It's almost a little eerie how it feels like we're being thrown back to the same soul being, reincarnated in a different body.
Yeah.
So I think we have mixed reviews. From Earth 1's perspective, it was cosplay and it was ridiculous. Okay. From Earth 2's perspective, it was actually effective.
It was galvanizing.
And also, as you pointed out, crowded out of the news to some extent, the real news about discovering that, Trump, we've been criticized. I've been criticized dozens and dozens of times for comparing Trump to Hitler. The problem is Trump compares Trump to Hitler. Okay, that's what we learned, in the shocking interview with Kelly and with some other people in the national security establishment. So I want to go through that interview. There's several tapes. We'll get to the Hitler one. When election nears, Kelly warns Trump would rule like a dictator.
What do you think? Do you think he's a fascist?
Well, I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America. Again, back to this issue of, democracy is complicated, messy to operate. Probably the worst kind of government there is, except for all the other ones. I think Churchill once said that. And again, our Constitution, our founders built in to the Constitution and to the way our government operates, built in a lot of checks and balances, and didn't design the government to be streamlined and whatnot. So, but certainly the former president is in the far right area. He's certainly an authoritarian. Admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
So this should be headline news. His former chief of staff is saying that he's a fascist.
Who is a 4-star Marine general with an impeccable history and who lost one of his sons in Afghanistan or Iraq. I think it was Iraq.
Right. But of course, Trump says he fired all those generals because they were all bad soldiers. But really what it is amazing how no one is on Earth 2 is processing the fact that this, army of people who have worked for him have come out against him. To know him is to realize that he's really a bad guy. And yet those people just get disqualified, right? Then they're just, they have Trump derangement syndrome. One of the things that I said early on in the show is that if Trump was elected, we will have an American Tiananmen Square moment. That Trump will send the tanks against the American people who at that point will be demonstrating against him over all kinds of issues. So when I said that, and I said that, remember, to reporters even years ago, it sounded very extreme and they sounded sort of skeptical about what I was saying. But now listen to what Kelly has to say about it.
And I think this issue of using the military to go after American citizens is one of those things I think is a very, very bad thing. Even to say it for political purposes to get elected, I think it's a very, very bad thing, let alone actually doing it.
So you're saying when you saw him say that recently, and as he said on the campaign trail, that was something that really concerned you to the point that you thought, as you sat there trying to figure out what to do, you thought maybe it's worth answering some questions about this.
Yeah, until the former president started talking about this, and this goes back to when I was in the White House, for that matter, DHS, I was, originally the conversation would be, Mr. President, that's outside your authority, or, that's a routine use. You really don't want to do that inside the United States. But now that he's talking about it as I'm going to do it, is again, it's disturbing.
Yeah, he's telling us what he's going to do. It's really amazing that they've done this study of Trump supporters, and they don't believe that he's done all the bad things that he's actually done, and they also don't believe that he's going to do the bad things that he's promising to do. They think he's speaking, rhetorically or, for effect. But he's telling us what he's going to do, that he will be a dictator from day one.
And one thing, I just want to go back to what you said about yourself, John, because John has really been on the forefront of this for a long time. And I think, John, because you speak with a lot of energy and alarm, you're right. People at first didn't always think that your warnings were right. But you know what? I've known you a long time. They've always been right. I'm not just being nice. I've known you for a long time. When you say something, even when I've raised my eyebrows, it's like 6 months later, it's like, oh, no, you have an unerring ability.
Thank you.
I think to really kind of know when danger, you can see the trajectory of something, I think, rather well. When you were a young psychologist and talking about your patients, you were very, very good at seeing the trajectory of the treatment, particularly those with severe personality disorders. So I think your warnings have been borne out and continue to be.
Yeah, unfortunately, but thank you.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, so getting back to Hitler.
Speaking of Hitler,
right? How's that for a segue? I know people are going to say we're making light of it, but it's dark humor. Here is General Kelly talking about how Donald Trump talks about Hitler.
He commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, sir, first of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist life, philosophy, so that nothing he did you could argue was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason. And but he would occasionally say that.
What would he say when you would lay that out to him?
He'd just, that'd be the end of the conversation usually.
I mean, did we ever think we would be in a reality where we'd be having a conversation about a former president and presidential candidate who routinely compares himself to Hitler?
Well, and it was reported 30 years ago by one of his ex-wives that he had a copy of Hitler's speeches on this bedside table. So he's been into this for a long time.
Right. And he wants this authoritarian impulse, right, to be the strong man. Mm-hmm. It really kind of cuts through everything, whether he's trying to appropriate Arnold Palmer's big dick, as his own and say he can he can drive farther than he can, or he's
a 10 wood, so to speak.
a very stiff shaft.
See what I did there?
But he needs to be the most powerful. He needs to be the most popular. And so the whole authoritarian, of course, and in one sense, he would sort of worship a Hitler, right? Because he had this supreme power, right? And that's what he craves, right? And also because he's a malignant narcissist like Hitler, he craves to have a kind of destructive power.
Yes.
And people really need to understand how malignant and malevolent and sadistic he is, right? He doesn't just want to take over and be corrupt. He wants to take over and jail and punish and torture enemies, right? It's not enough for him to win all the marbles. He's got to crush everybody else and laugh while doing it.
Oh, yeah.
We have one more piece of tape from a different member of the national security team that worked with him. His name is Kevin Carroll. You may not have heard of him, but he talks more about how Trump talked about Hitler. And I think it's important to hear it from one more source.
He certainly admires Hitler. I mean, he frequently said to senior staff, why don't my generals support me the way that Hitler's generals supported him? And of course, Hitler's generals, for the most part, did not support him. They tried to assassinate him several times. But just the fact that the president would think of himself, the fact that President Trump would think of himself in the same sentence as Hitler is a terrifying thing. The man quotes Hitler. I mean, phrases like poisoning the blood of the country and enemies of the people, those are things said by Hitler and Stalin as well. And it's not as if he's accidentally quoting them. When it's brought to his attention, sir, you just quoted Hitler. You just quoted Stalin or Lenin. He doesn't mind. He says it again.
I think the most important word there is frequently. He frequently compares himself to Hitler. I mean, when I first started comparing him to Hitler in interviews, I got so much pushback, that I was so way off, that I was being so extreme. But here it is. He identifies with Hitler and he brings it up frequently.
Now we see it with Putin, we see it with Kim Jong-un, we see it with Viktor Orban. It's the same thing. Anyone who's really powerful and putting down his opponents and controlling his country is exciting to Trump. He wants those guys to like him.
Right. But why isn't this dominating the news cycle, right? Who gives a heck about him giving out French fries? The man is saying he's Hitler. Hello. It's really shocking that's not shocking.
But even with Kelly doing this, it's winning the news cycle because it's crowding off news about Kamala. It just is. Now, I think this is damaging for him. I think he's going to lose some undecided Republicans and some swing voters with this. So I don't think it's good for him. But I keep waiting for the media to show as many clips as Kamala as they do about Trump, and they don't.
Yeah. Well, I hope he loses a few Jewish votes. I mean, what is this, springtime for the American Hitler? I mean, this is just insane. How can you be a Jew for Hitler? I'm just asking. No, you don't have an answer? All right. Well, then we'll have to move on. Moving to our back to our segment, bad news, good news. All right. We're going to start with some bad news. Here was a column that appeared in the New York Times by Ezra Klein. What's wrong with Donald Trump? Oh, goody. Maybe someone's finally going to address the issue on October 22nd. Okay.
Could be, John. Let's wait and see what he says.
That's right. Okay. Actually, Harry, could you read this one?
We've never had good language for talking about Donald Trump. We've never had good language for talking about the way he thinks and the way in which it is different from how other people think and talk and act. And so we circle it. We imply it. I don't think this is bias so much as it's confusion. I'm starting to talk like Ezra Klein. In order to talk about something, you need the words for it. But for me, something clicked watching him up there swaying to that music. I want to tread carefully here. For years now, there's been a cottage industry of books diagnosing Trump with this or that psychological malady. And the view that Trump's psychology borders or tips into the pathological is not limited to his critics. John Kelly, Trump's second chief of staff, is known to have bought the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president seeking insight on the man he served. But there are strong reasons why we in the media and psychiatrists in general are careful with this kind of language. There's a rule in psychiatry that you don't diagnose patients you haven't directly examined. That rule comes from politics. It's called the Goldwater Rule because they did that to Barry Goldwater and got sued and lost. The history of pathologizing political leaders we do not like is not an admirable one. So I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm saying something simpler and I think more neutral here. Trump moves through the world without the behavioral inhibition most of us labor under. And when I say that, I'm describing both what is wrong with Donald Trump and what is right with him.
Can I just start out by saying that I think Ezra Klein is an idiot? And this article is a piece of dreck.
Mm-hmm.
And also, listen to the logic here. Well, you know, we just don't have a language to describe Donald Trump's behavior. So you can't blame us in the media for kind of fumbling around trying to imply or describe what's going on because we just don't have a language for it. And then in the next paragraph, they go, well, there is a language for it. That there's a cottage industry of psychiatrists and psychologists who have used psychological language and terminology and categories to describe it. But because of the Goldwater Rule, we have to dismiss and disqualify all of those observations and thoughts. And so we're just left to kind of figure it out on our own. And I think he's just, you know, a little uninhibited.
No, and it also the cottage industry is a kind of swipe.
Yeah,
like there are people making money on talking about
I wish
how sick Trump is, as if, right, as if. But you know what I mean, John? I mean,
I do know what you mean.
It's dismissive, and it's
yes, it is.
And to be honest, because I think Ezra Klein can be really smart, but here he's really precious by half. Yeah. There's a preciousness to this.
It's just sad because it really is. Here we are on the verge of the election, right? With all that we've seen. And this is a left-wing intellectual in the New York Times. And this is what the best he can come up with.
Right. In a week where Trump has been quoted praising Hitler.
Right. And also swaying to the music because he can't talk, and you know, all of the signs of gross pathology that anyone could recognize that would make you want to bring him to a home for Don. You know, Ezra Klein says, "Oh, well, we can just dismiss all that." I think he's just kind of a wild and crazy guy. Know what I mean?
I hate to say it, but it's sane washing.
I don't hate to say it. It's gross sane washing. It's criminal sane washing. It's malpractice.
I know it's he just needs to read something.
Yeah, maybe he needs to read the book that John Kelly sent for in order to understand Donald Trump. And by the way, John Kelly said that The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump did illuminate for him and help him to understand the true psychology of Trump.
Exactly.
So we have one more bad news. Remember, we've been talking about the corporate media, right? And how the right wing's approach has been to just keep buying the media. By buying the media, they're buying the truth. Well, here's another example of that. The LA Times editorial chief quits after owner blocks Harris endorsement. Mariel Garza said the editorial board was prepared to endorse Kamala Harris, but the paper's owner, Patrick Soon-Shiong, decided not to make an endorsement in the presidential race. In an interview with the Columbia Journalism Review, Mariel Garza, who held the title editorials editor, said she had quit because I want to make it clear that I am not okay with us being silent. In dangerous times, honest people need to stand up. This is how I'm standing up. Ms. Garza said that the editorial board had planned to endorse Ms. Harris, but that Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the billionaire owner of the Los Angeles Times, decided this month that the newspaper would not make any endorsement for president. The paper did not explain to readers why it was not issuing an endorsement. So here's a perfect example, right? The editorial board had made a decision to endorse Harris. And after all, this is a California newspaper, which is predominantly liberal state, but also she's the former senator from California, the former DA of California. This is their favorite, I guess they would call it favorite daughter candidate. And yet the billionaire who bought the paper is nixing it.
And it's the greatest newspaper of California. It's not a minor one. The LA Times is huge.
Yeah. So this is how they're taking pieces off the board, right? One at a time. There is also some good news, and it relates to this issue of the Goldwater Rule that we were just talking about. SV Date is the chief White House correspondent for the Huffington Post, and he interviewed Alan Dyer, who's the last living member of the ethics committee for the American Psychiatric Association that wrote the Goldwater Rule. Let's see that cover. The doctor who wrote the Goldwater Rule says he would recommend dementia tests for Trump. An author of the 1973 American Psychiatric Association Standard said it was never meant to stop doctors from expressing their opinions based on public information. So, I also interviewed Alan Dyer, actually, several years ago for an article I wrote for the British Journal of Psychiatry about the Goldwater Rule. And he was very, very clear that what he said was that, just to remind people of the historical context, this is before we had the DSM, when psychoanalysis kind of ruled the roost in psychiatry. And when this Fact magazine asked psychiatrists about whether Goldwater was, mentally impaired, a lot of them gave very speculative answers, that he had an unresolved Oedipus complex, that he was a latent homosexual, that he'd been scarred by his potty training, that he hated his mother. And so these were irresponsible statements. Nobody could know that without actually having someone in therapy.
Well, they were terrible. And Goldwater was an extremely sane person.
He was actually extremely sane. He was not unstable. So it really was true libel. It was true libel. He deserved to get the libel thing. But what Alan Dyer explained to me is the psychiatry was embarrassed, right? Because they didn't want psychiatrists making irresponsible, unsupported statements that would embarrass the field. And so when they took out that rule, it was because they didn't want psychiatrists making unsupported statements. He independently agrees with us that once the DSM was introduced and people were, which has observable behavioral criteria for every disorder, that at that point psychiatrists indeed could make responsible diagnoses because they could observe the behavioral criteria. And also the Goldwater Rule was never meant to be a blanket gag order, preventing mental health professionals from speaking out about public figures. Well, of course, this came to a head during the Trump administration, and the APA Ethics Committee had to have a special session about the Goldwater Rule. And what they did was, not only did they not overturn it or have exceptions for the conscience of their members and for the exceptionally dangerous situation that America was in, they doubled down on it and expanded Goldwater, so that now psychiatrists could not make any public statements, not just a diagnostic impression, any public statements about public figures. So SV Date did a great job in interviewing Alan Dyer again and just showing the whole hypocrisy of the American Psychiatric Association. They're not following their core ethical principle. They're following the ethical principle that's called cover your ass.
Yeah, and just a lot of people don't know the difference between psychiatrists and clinical psychologists. But John and I are clinical psychologists. We didn't go to medical school. We went to graduate programs of psychology, and we don't have to adhere to the Goldwater Rule. There's no version of that in the American Psychological Association, which means that I look at my colleagues, particularly some I used to work with at the medical school, who refuse to make any statements. And my feeling is, academic psychiatrists will have blood on their hands if this man is elected again and they did nothing to point out the very obvious disorders that he exhibits.
Harry, I'm glad you used that term, blood on their hands.
Oh, yeah. I mean it.
Not only did they say nothing, but they punished and disqualified the expertise of the people who did say something. I mean, here we are, right? Like a week and a half away from a razor sharp election that will determine the fate of the world. I believe it's that momentous. And as you say, if we lose and, the American Hitler takes over, there's a lot of people to blame, obviously. But the American Psychiatric Association has enough blame that it could have made the difference.
Exactly.
Right? Because if we had been given permission to use the language that actually does describe and explain Donald Trump and educate the public about that, all those things are true. They're facts, they're reality. And yet, even on Earth One, right, they disqualify those facts. They dismiss them. We've talked about this before. The Washington Post interviewed me 3 times, and Marty Barron spiked the story because of the Goldwater Rule. So there's been a systematic exclusion of this information from the public domain, right, by the media in obedience to this antiquated professional guild cover your ass rule.
For psychiatrists, not for us. And listen to our audience. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are facts. These are facts. People have lost their jobs. There's been pressure on psychologists working in departments of psychiatry because of this. And so don't take this as another one of those theories. It's not. It's a fact.
So we'll be talking with George Conway later about all the efforts to get this message out. But we've had to work past the resistance of the American Psychiatric Association and this Goldwater Rule. Every interview I've ever done, they bring up the Goldwater Rule. And
for me too.
Right, and every major news outlet and TV station that haven't covered this say they're not covering it because of the Goldwater Rule. I mean, it's really extraordinary. And yet, the person who wrote the Goldwater Rule is telling them that they're misunderstanding it. Okay. Well, Harry, I know that you had finally, because you're always complaining about how Trump is pushing Kamala off the front page, you have some footage that you want to show from her CNN town hall.
Yeah. What I've been doing every week is devoting, a good 10, 12 minutes to extended clips from Kamala Harris's campaign, because Trump's brilliant political acumen, his instincts, like, the fist up after he was shot at. He really believes, like his teacher, Roy Cohn, right, that there's no such thing as bad publicity, that you flood the zone, even if it's by saying vicious, terrible things, because then everyone will repeat it, then your name is being repeated, and lo and behold, what did Kamala say this week? I'm going to give you just 2 examples, because Kamala is fantastic in her campaign. So her final speech will be at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C.
So brilliant.
Where Trump gave that speech. He claims the largest crowd I've ever had, exhorting them to attack the Capitol. So she'll be there in direct contrast.
Brilliant.
But equally brilliant, Trump plans to have a massive rally in Madison Square Garden. Yeah. And people on the left and the Democratic side say, what's wrong with him? It's a blue state. Why would he want to do that? I can't stand it when people misunderstand how brilliant he is. This is his idea. He wants to have a massive rally at Madison Square Garden.
A spectacle.
Where he's up there and there's like 80,000 people, however big the Madison Square Garden is. And it's going to be very powerful. And as you pointed out, John, it was where there actually was a pro-Hitler rally in the 30s.
Right. There's a documentary about it. A Night at the Garden.
A Night at the Garden. So in the effort for counter programming, even within our show, which is still about 75% Trump, in part because we're doing this show to warn about his decline. So here's a lot
before
of
you show the tape, I just want to respond to that idea about spectacle. Okay, because I think Kamala gets it, right? Like you said, having that final meeting on the ellipse, right, reminds everyone of January 6th, but in a dramatic way, not just a verbal way, right? But creating an event, creating a spectacle. The other thing that's encouraging is in a lot of her, and I was hoping this was going to happen, and I was begging for this to happen, a bunch of rock stars are going to be performing with her at her rally. Beyonce is performing with her. The Boss is performing with her. I keep hoping Taylor Swift is going to pop out at some point. But again, to create a spectacle and to do what he does with his rallies, which is to energize our base.
Yes, and it's great that she's doing it. But I in these last few weeks, please don't be fooled by how crazy he seems. I mean, I want you to pay attention to how crazy he is and disturbed he is and declining he is. But he has not lost all of his political brilliance. And Trump is a brilliant political operator in the worst sense. But what he can do is just astounding to me. All right, let's talk about Kamala and give her some room. This is from her town hall last night. So after John and I went over our media list, I stayed up late to watch the whole thing and try to find not what everyone else has been pulling out. There's some great lines people have clipped, and I'm sure the right sort of Fox News has clips of her digressing or something like that. But I'm choosing these so you can hear more of who she is as a person. That's how I've been selecting the clips. Rex?
One of the first phone calls you made after President Biden announced that he was dropping out was to your pastor. And I'm wondering, if it wasn't a confessional, if you could say what that conversation was like.
Well, my pastor, Reverend Dr. Amos C. Brown of Third Baptist Church, it was an extraordinary day that Sunday when the president called me, and I instinctively understood the gravity of the moment, the seriousness of the moment. I didn't predict or know exactly how that day would play out, and obviously now it's been 3 months since I've been at the top of the ticket, actually 3 months as of yesterday. But I just called him. I needed that spiritual kind of connection. I needed that advice. I needed a prayer. And there's a part of the scripture that talks about Esther and a time such as this, and that's what we talked about. And it was very comforting for me. And do
you pray every day?
I do pray every day. I do pray every day, sometimes twice a day. I grew up. So we grew up a little neighborhood church in Oakland, 23rd Avenue Church of God. And I was raised to believe in a loving God, to believe that your faith is a verb, you live your faith. And that the way that one should do that is that your work and your life's work should be to think about how you can serve in a way that is uplifting other people, that is about caring for other people. And that guides a lot of how I think about my work and what is important.
You know what I noticed about this clip watching it this time? When Kamala is suddenly talking about something personal, something that she hasn't said before, and Anderson Cooper did a great job in throwing some of these questions in, she has a brighter smile. It's a little embarrassed.
Yeah.
Feels a little exposed. But then she goes with it. And that's what explains the authenticity.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very genuine.
Honesty of it. And you notice that she first got that expression. Then she talked about the conversation, and then she remembered her church in California, and there that happened again. That kind of warmth, that slightly embarrassed, and then she follows it out. And I think what we're seeing is a kind of authenticity as a person. It's very difficult to be a political figure and to make sure you're also being honest. And as I've said before, Trump is authentic in his bravado and in his confidence, but it's not honest or authentic because it doesn't involve any vulnerability.
That's an excellent point. And really, the nightmare, right, is that so often the Democratic candidate just memorizes a series of kind of slogans, and it's like, middle class kitchen table issues, Joe. And you just know they're kind of reading the script. And here, her answer isn't really that well formed, actually, because she's thinking about it as she's talking because she's being genuine, and she does feel. I agree with that. Look, where she's a little embarrassed, a little exposed, a little bit not sure how to phrase it, and then she opens up. And I think that moment for me, the key moment in that clip was when she says, "I believe in a loving God." And it was almost like kind of a confession to sort of, to put it that way. She wasn't saying it assertively, I believe in a loving God. She says, well, that's what I believe. I believe in a loving God. And the other thing I love about that, as you know, in this battle for God, I am not willing to surrender God to the right wing at all.
Well, as someone who was raised as an atheist in New York City, and I remain, I think, at best an agnostic, I still appreciate the way she talks about her faith. I like the way that she just opens up. And I was saying a moment ago, to be truly authentic is to be able to speak from your strength and from your vulnerability. It's both. But if you only speak from this narcissistic disturbance of Trump, you're only speaking from the pleasure of shoving it to people, only the pleasure of saying how great you are. That's not, it may be honest to the point where Trump is being honest, but it's not rich and authentic and deep. And that's what we're seeing in Kamala Harris. I can't remember another politician who has made herself so vulnerable and so strong at the same time. I can't remember one.
Yeah, I think that's right. And maybe that's what a female politician needs to do. We need to feel that she's warm. We need to, right? We don't want her to be a bitch, right? And yet at the same time, we also need to feel she's strong. We don't want her to be a pushover. She's managing to ride both lanes at once. She is strong and she is warm. She's both.
And it only works because that's who she is.
Right.
You can't fake it.
No, you can't.
All right. I want to go to the next question, which is more about policy and about tax policy, but I'd like you to see how she handles the questioner, and also leads to something that we hear later from Anderson Cooper.
I want you to meet Pam Thistle. She's from Wynmore, Pennsylvania. She's a realtor. She's a widow. Her husband, Mike, died just a year ago. She has two daughters in college. She registered with no party affiliation and says she's undecided. She has concerns about how you would handle the economy. Pam?
Thank you. And thank you, Anderson. And happy belated birthday
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for your loss.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And I'm really appreciative for you to be here and get to know you. When you talk about rich people paying their fair share, can you be more specific? Income taxes are already on a graduated scale, where the more you make, the higher percentage you pay in taxes. So the rich are paying a disproportionate amount in taxes as it is. Over 40% of Americans don't pay any income taxes. Also, the really high earners may move their money offshore if there are disincentives in the U.S. This could impact the economy. I would like to hear more nuts and bolts about your economic plans.
Sure. Thank you, Pam. So first of all, it is the case in the United States of America that billionaires on average pay less taxes as a percentage than teachers and firefighters and nurses.
I'm talking about hard workers like pound the street, have some success.
Yes, no, I understand,
Yes.
but I want to just let's
Not
set
the really high.
Let's set the scene, right?
Yeah.
So when I say that the richest among us need to pay their fair share,
okay,
I am referencing that, and I need to reference that because sadly, Donald Trump, when he was president, gave tax cuts to the richest, to billionaires and big corporations, which added trillions of dollars to our deficit. So that sadly needs to be said in a way that should be obvious to your point, but is not given what he did. Now, in terms of what we need to do to bring down taxes, I have pledged and have a plan for a middle-class tax cut that would affect 100 million Americans, including, for example, what we will do around small businesses. In terms of tax deductions, in terms of what small businesses are now being mired in terms of a bureaucracy around they have to fill out and do their taxes in a way that actually holds them back. Part of my plan includes extending a middle-class tax cut that would include a $6,000 tax cut, essentially a child tax credit for parents and young parents in particular, knowing that the vast majority of our parents have a natural desire to parent their children well, but not always the resources. So this is going to include an extra amount of just money that people can use to pay for childcare, which is far too expensive for too many working families. And part of the issue here is this. We cannot, and I will not, raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. But we do need to take seriously the system that benefits the richest and does not help out working middle-class Americans. I come from the middle class, and I believe that the middle class needs tax breaks to be able to actually not just get by, but get ahead.
I think she did a great job with that. At the end of the evening, they interviewed some of the voters, the undecided voters in the audience, and this woman did not raise her hand to say that she would vote for Harris. So in this case, this is not a vote that Harris was able to get. I'm not sure why.
Well, I have a thought about why. You know, she actually interrupted her when she was answering the question and said, no, I'm talking about the people who really beat the street and have success. In other words, there is a kind of Republican voter who is the sort of a small business Republican, what I call the small business Republican, people who are earning, you know, $200,000 to $300,000 a year, you know, with a small business or with a profession, which is a small business really. And so what she said is, well, taxes are already graduated, so the more wealthy people pay more. And so what that voter was hearing, even though Kamala did say more towards the end of the answer, we're not raising taxes on people earning less than $400,000, more than $400,000, less than $400,000 a year. And I suspect she doesn't earn more than $400,000 a year. I could be wrong. But I think that there are a group of people who actually are not going to have their taxes raised, but who are upper middle class, who when they hear we've got to tax the rich and make them pay their fair share, what they hear is, oh, so you're going to tax the rich. You're going to tax people like me.
Right. That makes sense. But I still think her answer, Harris's answer, was great. Now,
well, it was. And by the way, people should realize that one of the things that was driving Trump's success was that he was like by 20 points seen as better on the economy than the Democrats. That has evaporated.
It has. In the late poll this morning, they're practically even.
They are even
on taxes. Since when has a Democrat ever done well on taxes?
So the message is getting through, even though he didn't win she didn't win that woman's vote. She's won a lot of votes.
I agree. All right, we're going to go on to the next one. And Anderson Cooper is about to go on to someone else, and he stops and he reminds Harris of the woman we just saw who had lost her husband. And he asked Kamala, how does she deal with grief? And Kamala speaks of her mother who died, I think, 10 or 15 years ago. And of course, I realized afterwards, Anderson Cooper is thinking of his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, who died a few years ago. And if you guys ever need an audiobook on a trip, there's a fantastic book where Anderson Cooper and his mother write letters to each other over the course of a year, including letters about the suicide of Anderson Cooper's brother, which happened in front of Gloria Vanderbilt from her penthouse in New York. It is incredibly honest and psychologically rich and revealing. And I'm certain that Anderson Cooper is still grieving his mother. And so I think that's why he asked her. Now, I know this is getting a little bit in the technical weeds, but I watched this thing on YouTube TV where you can DVR anything. But when CNN put it on YouTube, they cut it into 7 pieces. And this question about grief, they cut off the last 30 seconds of it, which I thought was really important. So I recorded it on my phone. I sent it to our producer, Rex, who then just put it at the end of the clip and put stills in. So that's why it looks a little strange. But those of you listening will still hear it.
We never stop working for you, the audience, here at Shrinking Trump. I want you to know that.
Well, and we hope we never lose Rex, because he's just incredible.
Amen.
So here we go with this clip.
Let's go to actually. I want to reference something that about Pam. Pam, we mentioned her husband Steve died a year ago. You've talked about your mom, Shamala Harris, who died 15 years ago. What has grief been like for you? Do you still grieve?
Yeah, you don't stop grieving. You don't stop grieving. I mean, I think that there is, there are like 2 sides to a coin when you have lost somebody you love. Or that 2 sides to a coin, that phrase becomes evident, which is if you have had the blessing of a close and important relationship with someone, then when you have that, the other side of the coin is that when you lose them, the grief becomes even deeper. But I also believe that, for example, anyone who has lost a family member through cancer or an illness, my mother died from cancer, it is important to try and remember them as they lived and not as they died, because the grief can really weigh you down. I think the brain has a way of, when you're grieving, really spiraling down, and it's important, I think, to try and remember those you have lost in a way they'd want to be remembered, as being vibrant. And I think it's important to just to grieve as one does. I don't think there's any correct or proper way to grieve. And the most important thing is I think that people do not suppress what they're feeling at any moment, and the rest of us should give them grace to go through it as they will.
Now, as a therapist and as someone who teaches psychotherapy to my students at Cornell, I didn't want to lose that last bit, because the last bit she's saying, you have to give people the freedom to grieve as they will grieve. That it's a personal and unpredictable process to work through the loss of someone you love. And again, she was being so honest. And I hope that was helpful for Anderson Cooper. And it's clear that Kamala didn't think about Gloria Vanderbilt or know the story, because she could have said, as I know your mother did. Right? I'm not saying that was a mistake. I'm just saying it wasn't in her mind, but I think it was definitely in his. So look at this. We have 2 people, a very important news anchor and someone who we hope will be the next president, both of them being honest about their psychological experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is interesting to see this sort of psychological maturity, right?
Yes.
And along with the genuineness, so that this feels like a well-examined, well-expressed aspect of the human experience, right? And she automatically gave that empathy to the woman who lost her husband. Of course, it's sort of socially de rigueur to say, "Oh, I'm sorry," but she seemed to mean it. What a contrast to Donald Trump, who never gave a shit about another human being in his entire life, and they could die, and he wouldn't even think about them. He would just eat the next Big Mac. It's just such a contrast.
Yeah, I mean, your vice president is being threatened, and you say, "Who cares?"
Well, in that case, he was behind it. He deserved it.
But I know I always bring this up, but Trump had to have been so traumatized to be this disturbed. He's always been this disturbed.
Yeah.
And now he's declining in other ways. But I mean, he's so dangerous that I my sympathy doesn't extend to wanting anything good to happen to him politically. But I'm always reminded when you, in contrast to someone like Kamala Harris, who's just very self-aware, very honest. I wanted to present the end of this long town hall. It's a couple minutes long, and it's about policy, but again, she ends in talking about the American character, and I think we have to always pay attention to her.
I want to get one last questioner in. This is Elkin Pleat. He's a student at Temple University, registered Democrat, leaning towards voting for you, has yet to make up his final decision. Elkin.
Hi. First of all, go Birds, and hi I'm from Danville, California.
Oh, hi, Elkin.
But my question is, what is the proudest moment of your political career thus far, including when you were the AG?
Oh, that's a great one. I've actually had a few. One of them is I, as Attorney General of California, created what I named the Bureau of Children's Justice. And you may be familiar with that as a Californian. And it was because I believe that, frankly, we still have a lot to do in terms of policy that impacts children. And an investment in the children of our country is an investment in all of us and our future. And that work has actually produced significant results. That has been a proud moment for me. It was a proud moment for me to do the work that we've been doing that has addressed issues like maternal mortality. I mean, it's in response to an incredible tragedy, but lifting up that issue in a way that we agree that America should not have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. So I have had the good fortune of, in my life as a public servant, knowing the impact that we can have. And I guess that is probably what motivates me most, because I know we can make a difference. I really do. And I do believe that the American people deserve a president who's going to be hardworking and, will make mistakes from time to time, but it's focused on you. And I think that is so fundamental in this election. So fundamental. You deserve a president. I believe the American people deserve a president who's saying, look, let's just be practical. Let's get things done. And let's not be afraid of having a little joy to the point of, what makes you feel good about your work. Let's do it in a way that is grounded in optimism. The thing that I think we all know about who we are as the American people, we are people who are ambitious. We have aspirations. We have dreams. We are inherently optimistic. Inherently optimistic. And I think people are exhausted with the idea that we're just going to be divided and angry instead of working on the problems and working together. And that's what motivates me, and that's what makes me proud when we're able to do that. So.
Vice President Kamala Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Anderson.
One thing she said that's been quoted, and I hope she says it over and over again, she says, Trump has an enemies list, but I have a to-do list.
That's a great quote.
Isn't it?
Well, I think the answer itself to the question was a little rambling. She wasn't quite prepared for it, but when she got into talking about the American character, she does really express and put words to the true American character. And, that's what will be lost, right, if we go MAGA. She is literally articulating what I believe to be the true spirit of America.
Well, I think people who have complicated ideas, we get to watch them find their way from a question. We get to watch them, mention specifics and then go for the general thing at the end. Mm-hmm. And she does that over and over again. It's always a pleasure. It's something that Barack Obama did brilliantly. He could do that. So did Bill Clinton, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Any great orator can go from the specific to the abstract and make you feel like you You worked your way to get there, that you earned it.
Well, I'm very excited about our guest tonight. We're going to have George Conway on. He's now been our most frequent guest. This will be his third appearance. But the reason we're having him on tonight is the Anti-Psychopath PAC has initiated a national campaign, our last basically argument to the voters about Trump's being cognitively impaired and a dangerous malignant narcissist. I just want to say that George Conway has really been a stalwart in this movement. He has been trying to get the message out about Trump's psychiatric disorders and dangerousness really since 2017, 2018. And so this Anti-Psychopath PAC really is the culmination of all that work. And this campaign is sort of our last battle. With no further ado, let me introduce George. Hi, George.
Hi. How are you guys doing?
Good.
All right.
Welcome. Good to have you back.
So you're like the Alex
glad to be
Baldwin
here.
of this show. You're like the Alex. You've hosted Saturday Night Live now more times than any other celebrity. You've
I know, but I never
hosted-
get a script. I never get a script. I don't have a prompter. I don't know. I have any jokes. But we'll figure out. We'll figure something out.
You're pretty funny on your own. Well,
Okay.
so do you want to say something about this effort so people understand today? Or well, when people watch this, it'll be tomorrow because it streams on Friday. But today, Thursday, in the New York Times was a letter that I mostly wrote, but that we all worked on together. That where we have 230 now mental health professionals who have signed this document, including Harry. And tell us something about how this initiative got started, this idea of trying to get this information before the public and the strategy that you're pursuing.
Well, I've been doing, I've been kind of banging this drum for a number of years because I think, there was, obviously there was the Bandy's group early on in the book and so on and so forth, but it never really got as much traction as I thought it should have gotten. I mean, when I started getting into this stuff and reading about it, it was like all of a sudden a whole array of lights went on. The light bulbs went on because it was like, okay, now this all makes sense. These are set characteristics of a particular personality disordered type of types, and it basically it basically explains all of his behavior, from the trivial to the criminal to his authoritarianism, to his everything about him. It just you understand everything about him. You understand how he can be manipulated but not controlled. You can understand things that are just sort of unfathomable to the lay mind, that you can basically have someone who is utterly and completely devoid of morality and conscience and remorse and empathy and all those things that kind of make us civil to each other and decent and law-abiding citizens as much as we can. And so once I understood that, I was like, okay, I want to help explain why this makes him unfit for office. And I combined what I had read from people like you all, and some understanding of what the framers intended the president to be under the Constitution, and put it together. I wrote that piece in the Atlantic 5 years ago, but it never really took. I mean, I think it changed the discussion in elite circles because it was in the Atlantic, and I think the media in Washington kind of focused on it a lot, but privately. But it never, not enough of it sank into the public domain. And I still think not enough of it has sunk into the public domain, because we talk about him being weird, and we talk about him being unhinged, and it's like, okay, but what I'd like it to be more particular and more explanatory about why why his weirdness and unhinged nature makes it dangerous. I mean, for him to be president. And I guess it should be apparent that you really don't want an unstable person who talks about Hannibal Lecter and Arnold Palmer's member and Putter or whatever, to talk, to have control over the world's second largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. I mean, it should be without a given. But, I really do think it has such explanatory power that more people should understand the explanation. And so, that was one of the purposes of the Anti-Psychopath PAC.
Yeah.
And, there's no better people to really explain it. I mean, I can do what I want with my little placards with the DSM criteria, but, again, you guys are the experts. And so I want to put you guys front and center.
Right.
And it's time for that. And that's what we did through this ad. And that's how we did these two ads, the newspaper ad and the video ad. And you guys did a fabulous job in the video ad and also with the writing of the letter.
Oh, thank you. Well, why don't we take a look at the letter? It's a little bit long, but we're going to read the whole thing. So this is what was published in the New York Times. Actually, this is an earlier draft. I think the number is now 230. An open letter from 201 mental health professionals on Donald Trump's mental state.
As mental health professionals, we have an ethical duty to warn the public that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. His untreatable severe personality disorder, malignant narcissism, makes him deceitful, destructive, deluded, and dangerous. In short, grossly unfit for leadership.
Trump exhibits behavior that meet the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic and statistical manual criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and paranoid personality disorder, all made worse by his intense sadism, a toxic combination called malignant narcissism. This psychological type was first identified by Erich Fromm to explain the psychology of history's most evil dictators, like the one he fled in 1933. Detractors object that we mental health professionals cannot render such a diagnosis without first examining the patient, citing the Goldwater Rule. We believe that we have a more overriding ethical duty to warn the public about the dire danger of this individual poses. History has taught us that in such circumstances, saying nothing is never the more ethical choice.
In addition, since the Goldwater Rule was written, the field has adopted the DSM diagnostic system, which relies exclusively on, quote, observable behavioral criteria, unquote. For many years, we've all observed thousands of hours of Trump's behavior, reinforced by the observations of dozens of informants who have interacted with him personally. Using the DSM-5, it's not difficult to see Trump meets the behavioral criteria for antisocial personality disorder, for example. One doesn't even need to be a clinician to see Trump shows a lifetime pattern of failure to conform to social norms and laws, repeated lying, reckless disregard for the safety of others, irritability, impulsivity, irresponsibility, and lack of remorse. Because of their sadism, malignant narcissists perversely revel in their destructive power and relish inflicting humiliation and suffering on others, especially those they see as enemies. For example, according to people in the White House, during the January 6th insurrection, Trump watched the violence he unleashed for 3 hours on TV with glee, watching his favorite parts over and over on rewind.
To make matters worse, Trump appears to be showing signs of cognitive decline that urgently cry out for a full neurological workup, including an MRI and neuropsychological testing. These symptoms include a dramatic decrease in verbal fluency, tangential thinking, diminished vocabulary, overuse of superlatives and filler words, perseveration, confabulation, phonemic paraphasias, semantic paraphasias, confusing people, not just names, as well as exhibiting deteriorating judgment, impulse control, and motor functioning, including a wide-based gait. We suspect the result of such an evaluation, which we will never see, would be disqualifying. If Trump does have organically based cognitive decline, as we suspect, it will only get worse over time, grossly degrading his already impaired judgment, impulse control, memory, attention, reality testing, and capacity to process information, while dramatically exacerbating the symptoms of his toxic personality disorder. People suffering with mental illness are no more likely to be dangerous than anyone else in the general population. Malignant narcissism is the very rare exception. Without question, malignant narcissists have been history's most grandiose, paranoid, and murderous leaders. Inevitably, they escalate until they are completely out of control and ultimately destroy themselves and the nations they lead. As mental health professionals, we feel a desperate duty to warn our fellow citizens of this imminent catastrophic public danger before it's too late. So it was a long letter, but we felt like we really had to get in both the description of his personality disorder, his cognitive
got
decline.
everything in there. Yeah, you got everything in there. It was amazing.
And so this was in the New York Times today. Was it a full page ad, you guys?
Yeah, it was a full page ad. I wish
Wow.
I had the copy of it with me, but I don't. But I posted a picture of it on my Twitter feed and on the PAC's Twitter feed. We posted a web version that's easier to read, and we posted the signatory list.
Oh, great!
But really, thank you guys. It really is a tremendous contribution, and God bless you for putting it together and getting people to sign it.
Well, and God bless you for helping to raise the money so that we could get it in front of the public.
Yeah.
So it's been a great collaboration.
Yeah, great. And then you have the video ad, right? We haven't seen the video ad.
Let's see the video ad.
To understand why Donald Trump is unfit for office, understand why Trump is a danger to the republic, you must understand that he is a malignant narcissist.
Malignant narcissists exhibit a grandiose sense of self-importance, derive pleasure from causing harm, and are incapable of caring about other people's feelings.
This explains Donald Trump's pathological lying, his misogyny, his admiration for dictators, and his criminal behavior.
Trump is incapable of caring about you, our country, and the Constitution that a president swears to faithfully execute. He's only capable of caring about himself.
That is why Donald Trump is unfit for office.
This is why he's a danger to the republic.
Donald Trump has no choice but to be a malignant narcissist.
But we have the choice.
We can choose
whether or not to put a malignant narcissist in the White House again.
Anti-Psychopath PAC Inc. is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Doesn't look Harry.
Bravo, guys! Bravo. He did.
Oh,
you guys.
thank you.
You guys all have great voices too. It was really. It really came out nicely.
Thank you. Well, your production
nobody had some kind of nobody had any like squeaky voices that we had. It was great. Perfect. Guys all have good radio, TV voices. All of you.
Well, your production guy Barry was terrific.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
And
Barry's
believe
a
me,
hero.
He recorded us over and over and over again to get exactly.
Barry's a perfectionist. Let me tell you, he did
even enough monkeys reading a script enough times. One of them will sound Twitter worthy.
It was so great, so great. And you're gonna, he's now Donald Trump is going to get to see your smiling faces because he doesn't seem to, he's not leaving Florida all that much. I mean, he's out a couple days a week. And he was home the other day. He'll probably be home again. He'll get to see you. We were running these ads at Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster if he goes back up there, and so he's going to know you guys on a first name basis. So you should be pleased.
So you're telling me that we're going to be high on the enemies list? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, we'll all get. We're going to have our own block in Guantanamo, right? All right. No, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well,
we're going to vote.
Obviously, So obviously we're doing this to raise awareness about Trump's dangerous psychopathology, but overall, it really seems like the news has been breaking our way. I think you would agree about this, right? Maybe talk about this phenomena. We were saying we wish we'd come out with this maybe a week earlier because it seemed like there was like a critical inflection point where suddenly, and I think the reason for this is A, he's getting worse and more flagrant. B, Kamala is commenting on it. And so by her commenting on it, the press has to comment on it, right? That's the whole point. They have to report on what she talks about.
Right. she's forcing them to do it, which is great. It started off early on with weird. Now she's using the word unhinged. She's basically using, words that unbalanced. She's using words that connote. And she's not using unstable. She's using connotes that evidence, words that connote psychological problems. And I can't. That's a big step, because people were afraid to do that for a very long time. I think it's wise for them not to try to use the technical terms, because you get bogged down in that, and you get into a lot of stuff that we are able to get into. But I hope to think that we helped set the table for that, and hope that in the end of the day, we were able to create some running room for them to do that. And I think the person who deserves the most credit isn't on this screen. I think the person who deserves the most credit is Donald J. Trump, for being himself and being more of himself than ever before, and continuing, from Hannibal Lecter to the AI crowds to Arnold Palmer's thing, and all of the crazy stuff that he's been saying lately, and denying that he has a personality, or admitting actually that he has a personality defect. All of the craziness and the incoherence, has itself forced the media to talk about, well, is he really, they don't like to get into whether or not he was this bad to begin with, or bad to begin with, and has these personality disorders. But since they went wild on Joe Biden for a few weeks on a lot less, frankly, evidence, it's great to see mainstream outlets like the New York Times did a whole spread in a Sunday paper about, Donald Trump. Is he losing it? And yes, he is. The answer, anybody can see it if they choose to see it. You have Fox News turning the channel and switching over to even a Kamala Harris rally, so they don't show how crazed he was. Like the night of when he talked about Arnold Palmer's penis, that's what they did. They switched to Kamala Harris, so they talk about her instead of talking about how crazy he is. And and again, the campaign is talking about it, at least in very, very general terms.
And they're talking about his cognitive decline too. They're also talking about his cognitive decline. The campaign.
It's easier to understand because we see it in our own relatives.
Exactly.
People who have dealt with an elderly and infirm individual know how quickly somebody can go south, and some of their, and particularly people who have not necessarily the most pleasant personality traits can go really, really south very, very quickly, and their negative personality traits tend to be enhanced and drawn out. So, it's a scary thing. It should be a scary thing to most Americans, and I also think it's an exhausting thing, because we've been listening to him for years.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, there are a number of things that are going to lead to him losing this election. And I think basically, I've said this. I know you've heard me say this, John, for quite some time. If the election's about him, it's just basic politics. If this election's about him, like he's the incumbent, or the way it was about him in 2020, and the way it was about Hillary in 2016, whoever this election is about is going to lose the election.
Yeah.
And what we see the Kamala Harris campaign doing over the past couple of weeks is they are now turning back to him, and basically making him the issue. And at the same time, people are excited about her. People are terrified of him, and I'm glad. People are freaking out at the Democrats being freaked out, and that oh my God, they're scared of losing, and now they're going to lose. Is he going to lose? Is he going to win? No, I don't view it that way. It's like the more fear is one of the best human motivators. I think, doctors, you would agree. And people should be fearful of what could happen in a new Trump administration. And I think that's motivating the right people to show up at the polls. Meanwhile, I don't think his base is excited about it anymore. I mean, they like him because he's, they liked him because he's different. They like him because, he was entertaining. They like him because he provokes the other side, and he just doesn't do that well anymore. It's just not. He's a joke. It's just, we've been seeing it. We've seen the rerun too many times, and he's getting harder and harder to defend with his clear deterioration, his cognitive deterioration. It's like, it takes so much effort, so much cognitive dissonance to be a Trump supporter. And I think I think he and that movement are out of gas, and that's why I could be wrong. I've been wrong before about elections, and I certainly hope I'm not wrong about this one, but I could be wrong. But I think that gives her the advantage here in this home stretch. That said, we're going to wake up on November 6th or 7th or 8th or whenever it is that the final call is made by the networks, and we're going to wake up and say, how the hell did 75 million people vote for this guy still? And, that raises a lot of questions that I think we need to think about going forward in the future about, our public discussion and about the way people receive, about the information ecosystem we reside in the modern era, and frankly, the mental health of the country.
I've noticed, I'm, as you know, I live up in Ithaca, New York, which is, as one bumper sticker says, it's 15 square miles surrounded by reality. So if you drive out, 20 minutes out of town, you're in upstate New York, which is Trump country. And in the last couple of cycles, there have been a lot of Trump signs. This time I counted, I have a little place out in the country about an hour outside of Ithaca. I counted 5 Trump signs and 3 Harris signs. And I saw a number of people who had the signs for representatives and for senator, but not putting the presidential candidate out. And I have a colleague in North Carolina who's been seeing the same thing. So we're starting to have a very savvy electorate, who are thinking about ticket splitting.
I think that the Trumpers are exhausted. Mm-hmm. And I think the things that are going to put this election away, again, the polls are based upon assumptions that pollsters make about who's actually going to turn out to vote, and those assumptions they use historical assumptions based on what happened in the last election or the prior elections or some blend of those. And every election is different. There's going to be something that we're going to see. At 8 o'clock on election night before they start calling states, and they say exit polls show that women were the most highly motivated. Exit polls show that 10% of Republicans voted for Kamala Harris. Things like that are actually going to give us clues about what's different about this race, what's different about this election, because every election is a little different, and some elections are really different. I think this one has the potential to be really different than some of the past elections, because I think I think there's a bunch of things going on. I think he particularly offends women, not just because he's a sexual abuser, but because of the overturning of Roe. And I think there are a lot of Republicans who can't get over January 6th. And I met some of them out in Pennsylvania at the Kamala Harris rally she held with a lot of Republican public officials.
Oh, were you, George? Wait, George, stop. Were you there at Washington's Crossing?
Yes, I was. And, I was, and I actually met somebody. It was funny. I was sitting there, and right next to me was a psychiatrist from southeastern Pennsylvania who was a former Republican. Republicans for Harris, and I got her to sign the letter.
Good man.
So it was pretty good. It was it was worth the trip up there. There you go. I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm every time I hear that the Democrats are scared, I think that's great. I know that's perverse, but I do think, I do think that the fear is an important motivator here and critical, because I think there's just so much at stake here.
The first person to say that was Machiavelli, was that nothing motivated the populace. If you didn't keep them happy, then keep them afraid. But I heard,
okay, all right.
I heard Jim Messina.
Does that make me? Am I like 1 for 4 now on the malignant narcissism thing? I don't know.
Well,
Machiavellianism is up
sometimes
there,
a Machiavellian is what you're looking for, George.
They're good, maybe they're good Machiavellians. I don't know.
That's right.
Well, Machiavelli did sometimes know what he was talking about.
Oh, actually, Machiavelli himself wasn't a guy you want
to. Was he? Okay. You didn't want to.
Yeah, no. I read a biography of him. He actually was a great believer in democracy. He was a very complex guy.
Oh, okay.
That whole advice he gave to the prince, a lot of it was actually sarcastic. He was actually a very subtle ambassador and politician.
He also wrote
because he was Machiavellian. He knew
exactly. He was Machiavellian. So he was manipulating everybody.
He also wrote comic plays. I mean, he was a real Renaissance figure, But Jim Messina this morning was talking about how Obama came up to him in 2012 in the re-election campaign, saying, "Hey, why does the Rasmussen poll say that Romney's up by 6?" And Messina said to him, "Look, the polls suck. First of all, they're terrible. Second of all, there's other metrics. There's enthusiasm. There's the way in which people are volunteering." He said, don't worry. He said, but Democrats were always worrying. And Joe Scarborough said this morning, the Republicans were always super confident, even when they don't deserve to be.
Right. No, and they make shit up about being confident, and that's sort of it's a very Trumpian brand. And I think that cuts both ways. I mean, the psychology of this cuts both ways. I mean, if you say you're going to win and you do so and your people become overconfident and they don't show up, you're hurting yourself. Yeah. If you're saying that they're going to win and people get excited and show up to the polls, you're helping yourself. Same, and also if you say that you're going to lose or you're concerned, people can get demoralized and not show up. Again, I don't think that's where the Democrats are going with this. I think the level of excitement and fear and motivation is at a fever pitch. And I don't think you can capture that. I don't think polls can capture that. They don't, they can't really ask people. And I was married to a pollster for 2 decades. And one of the things I learned was, you can ask people, are you going to vote? And people are going to say yes, who are not going to vote. I mean, it's like, I want to go to the gym tonight. I'm going to go eat my vegetables tonight. I'm going to brush my teeth thoroughly for the 2 minutes that my dentist says I'm going to do it, or whatever. All these great things. And I'm going to clean my room or whatever. And we do some of it, not necessarily all of it, but we want, our responses are aspirational as much as they are factual. And, people aspire, they want to be good citizens and vote, but hey, they're busy. And the people who are motivated are the ones who show up to vote. And I think the Democrats are way more motivated, particularly the women. And I think that there are a lot of Republicans, and these are the same people who showed up at this rally in Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania, and who showed up to vote for Nikki Haley. I mean, I got my issues with Nikki Haley, but they were voting. They wanted to show, even after she had dropped out of the race and Trump was the only remaining candidate, they wanted to show their opposition to Trump. And these Republicans went out and they voted in droves, 20% in some places against, for the one candidate against Trump, even though there were no candidates against Trump. So, I mean, those people I think are motivated and they're going to show up too.
I really want to thank you for all of the work you've done to help get that message across. We've been warriors. We've been message warriors. We've been playing in this, we've been fighting this battle for years and years. And
I'm ready to stand down, believe me.
I'm ready to stand down. We're exhausted. We are exhausted.
Yeah.
But if we win, and I believe we are going to win, I do believe that it will be in part because this message did get through.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope it's gotten through. I hope enough messages that have needed to get through have gotten through. And, you know, I feel personally, and I think you guys should feel the same way. I'm going to be really unhappy for the country if Kamala Harris doesn't win. But I'm not going to leave with some kind of feeling that there was something I could have done that I didn't try to do. And, you know, maybe that's selfish way to feel, but I don't have that level of anxiety that I've had in the past. In 2020, I felt, God, I should have done more. I've felt that way for the last several years. What can I do? What have I done? How can I make it better? I'm just one person, but I did, I think, more than I ever thought I would. And, you know, it's out there. I got nothing left.
George, I began to watch you when you started to really emerge about a year and a half ago on MSNBC and on CNN.
Yeah, doing TV, yeah.
No, but that was very important. You were laying the groundwork and you were doing it with energy and clarity. And you were really speaking the unspeakable. Right? And that's
why, you know, and what's weird that you're not wrong that it was sort of unspeakable.
It was.
Because I remember thinking about this in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Do I dare say this stuff publicly? And there really was, like, I was terrified of doing it at first. But, you know, when you're right, you're right. And that makes it a lot easier. I mean, I look at it again and I was like, okay, I mean, he checks all these boxes. Why can't we just say that?
Well,
and it helped to talk to professionals saying, yeah, you know, basically you're right. Some people say, well, I can't say that, but yes, you're right.
Well, you had the rhetorical power to say what hadn't been said, and you said it forcefully, and you said it with energy, and what I think is most important for communication, with suspense. And I think when someone is committed to speaking the truth, that's a sign, by the way, that they're not a malignant narcissist. I know it was a joke you made a few minutes ago, but it's a counter indication.
That's right.
It's also easier. It's also easier to live your life where you're basically saying the same stuff publicly that you say privately. I mean, that's a problem a lot of politicians have is like, you know, they got one face for this group or one face for that group or one face. It's a problem in this town, Washington, D.C. It makes life complicated for people. And, not having to run for public office and being able to say whatever the hell I want. It's a privilege to live in this free country. Let me tell you, at least now.
Well, George, you've left it all on the field, and we're looking forward to being able to have a beer at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall when it's all over.
Yeah, absolutely. Us old battle-worn,
exactly.
The battle-worn Zoom soldiers, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. Slacktivists. but thank you. It's been a long road, and I hope we're at the end.
All right.
Thanks so much, George.
Thank you, guys. Always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to see you. Well, I think our audience has earned the chance to get to the shrink wrap portion of our show.
Yes.
So, Harry, what have we learned this week?
What did we learn this week? I think in thinking about what we talked about on the show, I think we have to see Donald Trump as a complicated combination of brilliance, instinct, charismatic leadership, as well as destructiveness, aggression, the wish to demean and to seize power, all happening as his brain is deteriorating. And it's very dangerous to forget about his strengths when you're mesmerized by his weaknesses. And I think you always have to keep the strengths of your enemy in mind. If you're talking to people about this election and you're talking to someone who's very enthusiastic about Trump, don't dismiss their enthusiasm. Counter it with his corrupt morality and his deteriorating functioning. Don't forget how good he is. He's always been excellent. He came out of nowhere to become president. Who does that? Right? So,
with a little help from his Russian friends, but
oh yeah, oh no, he'll get help, but he couldn't have. It couldn't have been just anybody.
That's true.
Anyway.
They've been grooming him for a long time, actually. See what I did there? See what I did there?
Listen, I believe you, John. You're always right about this stuff.
Well, I know that some of our loyal listeners and followers and viewers are probably been looking forward to the dance ending in our show. And I have to say, Harry, I was really looking forward to doing the Arnold Palmer with you. And I don't mean that in a sexual way. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I'm afraid we can't be quite so mirthful because we have a little bit more of a solemn occasion to talk about.
Yeah.
One of the psychologists who has been most active in our movement passed away this week, Phillip Zimbardo. If you've taken an undergraduate course in psychology, you've heard Phillip Zimbardo's name. He's the most famous psychologist that I've ever known personally. What he's most famous for is an experiment he did in the 60s called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And the Stanford Prison Experiment, I think, is one of the three most important experiments to follow World War II.
Yes.
After World War II, people were asking the kinds of questions that we're asking now, right? How could people follow this clown? How could people lose their morality and their decency and their common sense and their judgment and follow someone who's so patently evil? How can it happen? Well, that was the question that was on psychologists' minds after World War II. It was a really burning, urgent question. There were really three studies, two of which you could not do today because they would be considered unethical. So thank God we didn't have an ethics committee in the late 60s and early 70s. The first is the Stanley Milgram experiment, right, which all of you are familiar with, where the experimenter at Yale is telling these undergraduates that he has to shock a Confederate who's actually part of the experiment because it's a learning task. And so they need to be shocked every time they fail to learn. And yet, because the authority keeps telling them they must continue, they raise the level of shock almost to fatality.
I mean, it's faked fatality, but it sounds real to the.
But it sounds real, right? The subject is actually screaming.
Right.
The subject is actually screaming in pain in the other room. They're faking it, of course, but the subject doesn't know that, and yet, in obedience to authority, they keep raising the electricity level and shocking this innocent person.
And just as a piece of trivia, my mother edited the book that Stanley Milgram wrote about that experiment.
Oh, well, that is interesting. Yeah, well, that's interesting. The other experiment is the Ash experiment, which doesn't have any ethical problems. But in the Ash experiment, they show people three lines. One is clearly longer than the other two, and they ask them which is longer. Of course, they all get it right. Then they do it in another condition where several Confederates who are supposed to be other subjects in the study but really work with the experimenter all argue that the shorter line is longer. And something like 40% of the people change their answer. In other words, they believe these strangers, right, more than their own eyes. But that's how fungible and liquid our understanding of social norms are, of even the physical world. And finally, there was the Stanford Prison Experiment, where what Philip did was he took a bunch of Stanford undergraduates. You've probably seen this in your, again, undergraduate course, and had them divided them randomly into guards and prisoners, and said they were going to kind of do a role play for a couple of weeks. And what developed was, in an extraordinarily rapid amount of time, at first it was kind of a joke, kind of a game, but in an extraordinarily rapid amount of time, the guards became incredibly sadistic and cruel. and controlling. And so it was really a shocking exploration of how normal people, just Stanford undergraduates, can be inducted into a sadistic authoritarian role so easily that it got so brutal after the first 6 days, they had to stop the experiment, which was supposed to go on for 2 weeks. So this is just the first 2 minutes of a documentary about the Stanford Prison Experiment.
On the first day, I said, this is not going to work. I mean, the guards felt awkward giving orders, and they'd say, okay, line up, repeat your numbers, and the prisoners start giggling.
Hey, I don't want anybody laughing. 3, 2, 1.
And then a very interesting thing happened. Dave Eshelman, who the prisoners named John Wayne, like he's a Wild West cowboy, he begins to be more extreme.
I decided that I would become the worst, most intimidating, cruel prison guard that I could possibly be.
I see in the future that you do work when you're told. And say it again. Say bless you, correction officer.
I was sort of fascinated myself that people were believing the act, and I was trying to see how far I could take it before somebody would say, okay, that's enough, stop.
We did have to do things like push-ups. We would have to sing things. At the beginning, we protested some of the actions. We did things to irritate the guards.
So the guards' authority was challenged right off the bat. And the guards had to decide how they were going to handle that, and they had to decide it without our input. I mean, again, this was not a Milgram study in which we were standing over them telling them what to do. And they began to see the prisoners' behavior as a kind of an affront to their authority, and they began to push back.
We would ramp up the general harassment, just sort of crank it up a bit. Nobody was telling me I shouldn't be doing this. The professor is the authority here. You know, he's the prison warden. He's not stopping me.
This is unbelievable. They took our clothes. Hands off the door.
There was the first evening a kind of rebellion that took place.
The prisoners rebelled. They barricaded themselves in their cells and said, we refuse to come out. They took off their numbers. They didn't want to be de-individuated. They started cursing the guards to their face. And the key turning point was the guards began to think of them as dangerous prisoners.
You know, John, Phil Zimbardo, Solomon Asch, Stanley Milgram, Leon Festinger, these were social psychologists who were so brilliant and innovative, and their work was really subversive. It was revealing the underlying aggression and capacity for sadism that's inherent in all human beings. And they were influenced by Freud, I believe, who had been arguing that human beings are essentially aggressive animals, and that we teach our children to become civilized and to put their aggression into words, but that it doesn't take much. And in fact, if there's a war, there's going to be rape and murder and pillaging. If you put someone in prison, a hardcore prison, there's going to be rape and murder and intimidation. Human beings regress to that very quickly. It doesn't take much. And,
Well,
that's what Zimbardo, who's just, he did other great studies too, just a towering figure in social psychology, what he was able to demonstrate in this very subversive way, I think.
Well, and you mentioned that they're social psychologists. So their worldview is that societal structures control identity and roles more than internal psychodynamics. And so that's really what they're trying to show. We just gave these people a different social role. Yesterday, you were a sophomore. Today, you're a prison guard. Okay. Are you still the same human being? Well, I guess a psychoanalyst would say, of course, they're still the same human being. A social psychologist would say, no, now they're a prison guard. Now they're a completely different type of human being. And
right, because they understood that roles can determine the expression of personality in different ways.
And so that addresses the issue of how could normal people become vicious Nazis?
Right.
And that was the question that everyone was wrestling with. And in our society now, too, we're seeing how normal people can get in line, right, with this worldview. And by the way, just to warn you, then, if Trump were to win, right, and implement Project 2025, it would be sort of like a Stanford Prison Experiment in the sense that now the roles that people would have would be to suppress dissent, to prosecute enemies, right, to fire on protesters, to round up immigrants. This would be defined as their role.
Well,
and so they're going to do it. They're going to
look
do
at
it.
how his followers attack election workers and secretaries of state, not even told by Trump directly to do it. So people are rising up to his invitation for aggression.
Yeah.
How many vicious emails have you received, John, over
Yeah.
the years from Trump supporters? I certainly do.
Right.
And anyway, so tell us more about what happens with Phil.
So what I was going to say is that, we talk about how long we've been working in this cause, right? Phil has been working to challenge and understand authoritarianism now for, over a 50-year career. And he had a second, he wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect about the problem of evil. And his involvement with our movement was just the next chapter in his ongoing activism. Phil was a stalwart part of the movement. He gave interviews. He wrote chapters. He wrote articles. He gave interviews. He gave speeches. He was very, very engaged. And by the way, he and his longtime friend and collaborator, Rosemary Sword, were also regular viewers of our show.
Oh, that's nice.
And also, the other thing I want to say about Phil is, we're talking about him as this towering figure, the most famous psychologist I ever knew. He was an incredibly regular guy. He grew up as a working class kid, Italian kid in the Bronx, and he never acted like he was anything else. That was his genuine self. He was a very genuine person, a very warm person, and a very open person, which you don't, Harry, you're in academia. I'm sure you could validate this. There are many, many academics, psychologists, and other academics with far less to brag about than Phil Zimbardo, who are far more officious and stuck up and puffed up about it.
And one of the nicest psychologists I know, academic psychologist, is Dave Dunning, who was on our show, who was a student of Phil Zimbardo's at Stanford.
And we want to have Dave Dunning back on the show because I think I want to do a more extended show about Phil Zimbardo. And so I'd like to have maybe Dave Dunning back and maybe even Rosemary Sword.
Yes.
The last thing I want to say is, so we've talked about this letter that we published in the New York Times of mental health professionals warning about Trump. Of course, I wrote to Phil to ask him if he would sign the letter, assuming that he would say yes. And Rosemary Sword, his longtime friend and collaborator, wrote me back and said, Phil is just too ill. He's just not able to really respond to your request. And then I got this letter from Rosemary. John, I'm very sad to share that Phil Zimbardo passed away on Monday, 3 days after he signed the letter. He was happy to do so. Keep fighting the good fight. Let's win this election because we aren't going back. Warm aloha, Rose. So signing our letter was more or less the last thing that he did. Yeah,
it's
makes me a little tearful too. Yeah, so I would just like to, we just want to end with a tribute to Phil Zimbardo. And, we have a problem here when we play music. If it's copyrighted, the whole show gets screwed up by YouTube. So Harry, you had a special song that you wanted to play at this little memorial.
Well, I was thinking about a number of them, including Charles Mingus's Goodbye Pork Pie Hat, and also a beautiful song by Sam Rivers called Beatrice. And then when John and I were talking, we realized late last night that 10 seconds, more than 10 seconds, and they'd scrub the show. And I'm not being modest. I'm a scratchy jazz pianist, but I recorded a version of Beatrice using my iReal Pro, which provides a bass and drums behind me, as a tribute to Phil. And I thought at least it will give you a sense of, of what it means to to really recognize the passing of a great person.
So we're going to play that song, but we're just going to basically sort of have a moment of silence and when we and reflect on Phil. So I think we're going to say goodbye now.
Goodbye, folks. We hope to see you again next week.
Yep. See you next week.